One day in 1991, 15 new countries appeared on the map in less than 24 hours, and the superpower that controlled them simply vanished overnight. This was not a war, and it was not a revolution. It was the Soviet Union collapsing so fast that world leaders woke up to a completely different planet. And the chaos that followed? Absolutely insane. Here is what nobody tells you about December 26, 1991. Everyone focuses on the Soviet flag coming down from the Kremlin, but the real story is what happened in those 15 republics that suddenly became independent countries. Some were ready, most were not, and a few had no idea what to do with their newfound independence because they had never asked for it in the first place. The Soviet Union was not just one country. It was 15 republics held together by communist ideology, military force, and Moscow's absolute control. Russia was the largest, obviously, but there were also Ukraine, Belarus, the Baltic states, the Central Asian republics, and the Caucasus nations. On paper, they were equal partners in the Union, but in practice, Russia ran everything, and everyone else followed orders or faced consequences. But by 1991, the whole system was broken. Mikhail Gorbachev had introduced glasnost and perestroika, measures that were supposed to reform and save the Soviet Union. Instead, they exposed how corrupt, inefficient, and unsustainable the whole system had become. The economy was collapsing, ethnic tensions were exploding, and the republics were demanding more autonomy. The August 1991 coup attempt against Mikhail Gorbachev was the Soviet hardliners trying to stop the bleeding, but it failed spectacularly, and it accelerated the collapse. The Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, had been pushing for independence since the late 1980s. They never wanted to be part of the Soviet Union in the first place, having been annexed during World War II. When the coup failed, they seized their chance and declared independence in August and September 1991. The central government was too weak to stop them, and suddenly 3 new countries had appeared. But the real domino effect began on December 1, 1991, when Ukraine held a referendum on independence. Ukraine is massive, with 52 million people, a huge industrial base, an agricultural powerhouse, and nuclear weapons on its territory. If Ukraine left, the Soviet Union was finished. Over 90% of Ukrainians voted yes to independence. Even in Crimea, which had a majority Russian population, 54% voted for Ukrainian independence. That showed how done people were with the Soviet Union. Within 3 weeks, it was over. On December 8th, the leaders of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus met in secret and signed the Belavezha Accords, which officially dissolved the Soviet Union and created the Commonwealth of Independent States. They did not ask Gorbachev for permission. They did not consult the other republics. They just ended it. 3 men in a room terminated a 69-year-old superpower. Gorbachev found out from news reports. The president of the Soviet Union learned his country no longer existed by watching television. He tried to stop it, but he had no power left. By December 25th, he resigned, and on December 26, 1991, the Soviet Union officially ceased to exist. 15 new countries were born: Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Moldova, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. But guess what? Creating 15 new countries overnight is chaos. These were not prepared nation-states with functioning governments, stable economies, and clear borders. These were Soviet republics that had been completely dependent on Moscow for everything: military, economy, administration, even electricity grids. Suddenly, they were on their own, and most had no idea how to run an independent country. The economic collapse was immediate and brutal. The Soviet ruble became worthless. Hyperinflation hit double or triple digits across most of the new countries. Store shelves were empty. People's life savings evaporated. Pensions disappeared. State employees were not getting paid. The entire economic system that had fed, housed, and employed hundreds of millions of people simply stopped working. Russia, as the successor state to the Soviet Union, inherited most of the problems. It took on the Soviet debt, the nuclear weapons, the permanent UN Security Council seat, and the responsibility for managing the collapse. Boris Yeltsin, Russia's first president, tried shock therapy economics, pursuing rapid privatization, free markets, and democratic reforms. What actually happened was the rise of oligarchs who grabbed state assets for pennies, massive corruption, organized crime taking over, and the Russian economy shrinking by 40% in the 1990s. Ukraine experienced similar chaos. It inherited nuclear weapons and then gave them up in exchange for security guarantees from Russia, the US, and the UK in the Budapest Memorandum of 1994. Those guarantees turned out to be worthless when Russia annexed Crimea in 2014 and invaded in 2022. But in 1991, Ukraine thought they were building a peaceful, independent democracy. The Central Asian republics, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, did not even want independence initially. Their leaders literally begged to stay in some form of union because their economies were completely integrated with Russia's. But when the Soviet Union dissolved, they had no choice. Kazakhstan's president, Nursultan Nazarbayev, was one of the last to accept independence. He wanted to preserve the union until it became impossible. And then there is Tajikistan, which immediately fell into a civil war that killed over 100,000 people and lasted until 1997. The country imploded because different regions, clans, and political factions all fought for power in the vacuum left by Soviet collapse. That is what happens when you create a country overnight without preparation. The Caucasus was even worse. Armenia and Azerbaijan started fighting over Nagorno-Karabakh, a dispute that has killed tens of thousands and still flares up today. Georgia had civil wars and separatist conflicts in Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Chechnya tried to break away from Russia, leading to two brutal wars. The Soviet collapse did not bring peace. It unleashed decades of frozen conflicts. But here's the thing that's absolutely wild. Some of these countries thrived. The Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, they immediately oriented toward Europe, implemented democratic reforms, joined NATO and the EU, and became success stories. Estonia became a tech hub. Lithuania and Latvia rebuilt their economies. They escaped Russian influence and never looked back. Poland, Czechoslovakia, and East Germany were not part of the Soviet Union, but they were Soviet satellites, and the USSR's collapse freed them too. The entire Eastern Bloc disappeared. The Berlin Wall had already fallen in 1989, and suddenly half of Europe was up for grabs. The geopolitical map was redrawn completely. And you know what is crazy? We are still dealing with the consequences. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is directly connected to the Soviet collapse and Putin's desire to restore Russian influence over former Soviet territories. The frozen conflicts in Georgia, Moldova, and the Caucasus are all legacies of 1991. The authoritarian governments in Central Asia are run by the same people who were in charge during the Soviet era or by their hand-picked successors. December 26, 1991, did not just create 15 new countries. It ended the Cold War, reshuffled global power, and created conflicts and alliances that define our world today. One superpower vanished. Another, the United States, became the sole superpower, and China started its rise to challenge American dominance. The wildest part? It happened peacefully. The Soviet Union had 30,000 nuclear weapons, the world's second largest military, and global interests everywhere. And it just dissolved. No nuclear war, no apocalyptic final battle, no last stand. It collapsed from within because the system was fundamentally broken and nobody believed in it anymore. 15 countries were born in one day, and the world changed forever. Which new country from the Soviet collapse surprises you most? Drop it in the comments.